Today's topic, it's all around kind of driving the sustainability agenda in business. And we've got two fantastic speakers today. So we've got Levent Ergen, who's Global Chief ESG Sustainability Strategist and Global Head of Strategic Alliances Partnership at Informatica. And we've also got Bill Wilson. So he's Chief Environment and Sustainability Officer at NTT Data. So thanks to both of you for taking the time to present today. Should be a really good discussion. It's obviously a really kind of hot topic for 2024. So yeah, just really keen to, obviously hear everyone's, feedback at the end of this session, what you thought went well, what you thought we should include next time, or indeed if you've got any suggestions on kind of hot topics that you think we should cover in this leaders advisory group. Always keen to hear suggestions. So I think in terms of running order, I think we have Levent first and then Bill, and then what we'll do is we'll go into questions and discussion time, which I think Lisa's going to lead us on. So if we're ready to go, I think kind of without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Levent.
Great, thanks, Jane. Grateful to be here. Thanks for the introduction and having myself and Bill on board. So I'm Informatica's Global Chief Strategist for ESG Sustainability and also the Global Head of ESG Strategic Alliance Partnerships. Now, the second hat is just as important as the first one because there's not a single vendor out there that can solve this ESG challenge on their own. So as we are seeing today, we've got three different companies collaborating around sustainability, and this is really what it's about. It's going to take a lot of companies to come together to really solve this overall challenge. And obviously, I will approach things from a data perspective. Informatica is a cloud data management company, but I want to start with setting the context as the World Economic Forum in their global risks for 2024 has put extreme weather events as the #1 global risk to all companies. So, above and beyond the regulations that I go through, this is a critical board level business risk. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of cover that off before I get started. So let's crack on. ESG reporting isn't anything new. Under corporate social responsibility, companies have been reporting on the social and governance dimensions for quite some time. But now there's a huge focus on the E, the environmental side of ESG. And one thing to bear in mind is majority of this data is non-financial data, yet it's it's already forming part of the financial statement of companies. Now, why the focus on the E? That's because in 2015, 191 nations signed the legally binding Paris Agreement to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees to avoid any harsh climate change. Now, unfortunately, we are very close to that 1.5 degrees. We've kind of dipped there. We've touched that point last year. And as a result, we're going to see more and more extreme weather events. As a matter of fact, on 16th of April, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervisors just published a new paper around the need for better climate, scenario analysis. So we're going to see more and more. I mean, you might remember 3 weeks ago in Dubai, they had 2 years worth of rainfall in just one day. A city in the middle of the desert was flooded. So we're going to see more and more of this, and businesses need to prepare for this. And when we look at what's happened since the Paris Agreement, the G7 and the G20 have made ESG disclosures mandatory. And at the time the Paris Agreement was signed, there was more than 400 different sustainability reporting frameworks. So think about how crazy that is. And to address that, IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standard, had put together a body called the International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, and this is an acronym soup, I apologize. And their role was to create a global baseline for ESG reporting. Now, they did that in June last year. However, until that happens, TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, is the kind of gold standard across most of the countries around the globe. And for a multinational company that's headquartered in the UK and has legal entities in other legal jurisdictions, what this means from a data governance perspective is that you're going to have to govern that data with different reporting frameworks. So this is where from a data governance perspective, it's critical for you to have a good foundational data platform so that you can really manage this properly. And when we look at the biggest focus for companies right now, and certainly, Bill's going to touch on this even more, if you were to draw a Venn diagram of all of the different reporting frameworks, right at the center of this is greenhouse gas reporting using the greenhouse gas protocol. Just like in financial reporting, you've got accounting standards, US GAAP and different accounting standards. The same thing applies for greenhouse gas protocol. So greenhouse gases, and the greenhouse gas protocol is the kind of global standard for carbon accounting. So that's broken up into scope 1, which is direct emissions, anything that comes from a pipe. Scope 2 is indirect emissions, things like purchased electricity and the indirect emissions from that, like the grid. And scope 3 is the biggest challenge, which is carbon emissions in the supply chain, which typically lives outside of the borders of your company in your supply chain. And companies that are serious about reaching their net zero targets, because more than 80% of the carbon footprint lives in the supply chain, the first place they need to start looking at decarbonizing is in their supply chain. So, and when we look at the different categories of data that covers the supply chain, you've got 15 different categories, and especially for financial services, we go even deeper, where for investments themselves, there's this concept called financed emissions, and this is where a lot of institutions are using Partnership for Carbon Accounting financials called PCAF for short. And within, for example, financed emissions, you need to be able to account for 7 different asset classes. What are the emissions associated with those? And then when we look at, for instance, insurance associated emissions, now insurance is even more complicated. You've got the portfolio side of the house, where you've got the capital view of financed emissions. Then you've got the underwriting side of it, where you've got insurance and reinsurance associated emissions. And then, when we look at really the personal motor lines, you've got the whole supply chain to think about as well. So this is a huge data challenge. And when we think about a multinational that's got a massive supply chain, you can't collect this data from 20,000 suppliers. It's simply not feasible. But what you can do is leverage the ESG rating agencies that have already done this aggregation for you to perform a rapid risk assessment exercise to set your baseline. And what I'm going to be covering in my talk track mainly today is about setting your ESG baseline, and then Bill's going to be talking about what do you do from there, what are your net zero pathways. So when we look at building a data strategy for ESG, it's kind of that question, who cares, right? So this is where you need to really think about the CXOs that you need to talk to as a CDO to build the most holistic data strategy. So the CFO needs to ensure that all of the non-financial data going into the financial reporting is accurate. So all of the CFOs and their controllers need to make sure that the data is correct. Then the Chief Sustainability Officer is a catch-all persona, such as Bill on the phone for NCT data. He's exactly that persona. He'll go into this a bit deeper. Then, because more than 80% of the carbon footprint is in the supply chain, the Chief Procurement Officer or the Supply Chain Officer plays a key role. And then particularly in financial services, you need to perform things like climate stress testing. So what does extreme weather events mean to our balance sheet? So the Chief Risk Officer as well as if they have a sustainable portfolio that they are building, then they need to use ESG ratings in their capital allocation decisions. So this is just an example of some of the personas that you need to speak to build a holistic data strategy, which a CDO needs to deliver. And certainly as Informatica, we are the data platform that delivers that. And when we look at the data challenges across the industry, we see that there's lots of different reporting frameworks. Data quality internal to organizations is problematic. Rating agencies are not regulated, so you can have one rating agency giving a completely different score compared to the other rating agency for the same company. A lot of the data, especially for supply chain, is disaggregated across your internal systems. What we are seeing is one line of business might be on SAP. They might have 20 different versions of SAP. Another line of business might be on Ariba. Another one might be on Coupa. Another one might be on Oracle. How do you bring all of this purchasing information for Scope 3 from all of your material masters and report on that at a group level? Then every single vendor out there has jumped on this ESG bandwagon, and it's hard to see the wood from the trees. And ultimately, this is a target operating model challenge where it's not just about technology, it's about people, process, and technology. So, this is ultimately a target operating model challenge. And then the reporting really needs to have accurate data. And, what we do at Informatica is, from our perspective, carbon accounting and reporting is just the tip of the iceberg. So we are where we were 20 years ago with financial reporting, where companies thought getting a financial reporting solution was going to be it, and data was an afterthought. We're going through the exact same pattern today with ESG reporting. And really 80% of the effort lies with the data, where you need to really pull in all of that data to a centralized location and apply all of the same controls that you need to have on financial reporting on this non-financial data, where you need to build your data catalog so you can find exactly where the data is, how the data hangs together, apply data governance to that, because now things are stored and the systems are not business friendly. So you need to tag that data with the appropriate business terms. Then most importantly, that needs to be trustworthy data. And instead of doing a topside adjustment, meaning fixing the data at the end of a process, you really need to do a root cause analysis, fix it at source, and then have that clean, trusted data propagate to where it's being consumed, such as in your carbon accounting and ESG reporting. And then you're going to have a lot of duplicate data, where, for example, in your supply chain, you're going to have to deduplicate, match and merge all that data to create a golden source of truth. And then from that point on, we then push that data to reporting. And more importantly, we then democratize that data and put that data in the hands of the business so that anyone who's got a role to play can, achieve data-driven sustainability transformation. So I think I've just, I'm approaching my 9 minutes and 30 seconds. So that's the key stuff that I wanted to cover off. Jane, should I hand over to Bill at this stage and then we do a Q&A at the end, or how would you like?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I mean, if we'll hand over to Bill and we'll get the questions and discussions going after.
Wonderful. Over to you, Bill.
Thanks, Yvette. That was brilliant.
Hopefully you can all see my screen. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks to Eden Smith for this opportunity. Like Levent, I have two jobs as well, not global ones. So I specifically work in the UK. So I look after data and AI solutions, and I'm also our internal facing Chief Sustainability Officer. So when I was approached about this webinar, I thought perhaps the combination of those two things would be interesting. So what I'm going to do is hopefully a complement to what Levent's already said, but taking it to the next level. So you saw the iceberg picture on his side. We've built the iceberg. Let's tell you a bit more about what we do with it. First of all, just a bit more about me. So as I said, I have these kind of two areas that I cover, specifically environmental sustainability. So I don't look at the kind of modern slavery aspects that Levent was talking about, but everything to do with carbon emissions reductions in my wheelhouse. And quite often in scenarios like this, I get to talk about both, which is quite fun. But what I find is that sustainability crucially relies on data, and at the same time, data and AI solutions need a sustainability angle to them as well. and I'm going to talk about both in the next kind of 9 minutes. It's probably worth saying though, in this role, oftentimes these things are complementary, sustainability and data, but sometimes they work against each other. So generative AI would be one area that we might end up talking about in the Q&A, which is a huge use of energy, and that kind of obviously conflicts with what we're trying to do in sustainability. Just a quick couple of things about NTT Data. What we do, we're a global systems integrator, probably best known for our infrastructure services and systems integration. We're an Informatica partner, so Levent and I know each other already, but we specifically do work in sustainability as well. We've done over 1,500 projects in this space, ranging from sustainable IT, sustainable strategy, and of course carbon footprint accounting as well. And we have the usual badges to show our internal story is strong. Just a couple of things on innovation though, which is perhaps a bit more interesting to this audience. Because we're a big Japanese owned corporate, we spend $3.6 billion a year on R&D, and increasingly that investment is targeted towards sustainable solutions. So this one I own here, it's basically trying to replace the electronics in current IT systems with photonics. So we're used to that happening on large scale fiber optic networks, but what actually happens at the end of those is we go back to electrons as well. Whereas if we can change all of that infrastructure to photons, we can make a massive impact on the global carbon footprint of IT. So that's one of the areas that NTT are basing big bets on. And then some other kind of more anecdotal things. We have the greenest office building in Europe. Ask me about that more if you'd like later. And then some more sort of interesting stuff like gene editing to increase the carbon capture of algae. Harnessing energy from lightning storms. Okay, there's been some lightning recently in the UK. Why would we let that go to waste when you can have a drone in a Faraday cage redirect that lightning to a autonomous vehicle on the ground and try and store it? So to some extent the mind boggles, but this is the kind of work we do, and also trying to harness solar energy from space and beam that back to Earth in a cost-effective way. So getting down to the kind of sustainability angle specifically, I often use this to think about the stakeholders that I face off to. So Levent had a series of, I guess, board level stakeholders that the CSO relates to. I guess I think about it slightly more wider. And the main thing that Levent was talking about was regulators and auditors, but I also find that our employees are increasingly looking for a purpose-driven organisation and some numbers to back that up. And we work with clients who are constantly looking at their competitors, for example. What are they doing in sustainability? Are we keeping up? And of course, the same is true as us. Partners are always looking for a strong sustainability story, and that's how Levent and I first met. Suppliers, we can talk about them as well. They want to know about downstream use of products. Future leaders of our organisation as well. I kind of think we need to be accumulating data now so that we can drive a strategy for people who might not even be working for our company at the moment. But actually, most of the pressure is coming from customers through the supply chain. So in preparation for this webinar, we talked about a kind of flywheel effect of regulation, but the knock-on effect of that is our customers ask us a huge amount of information about our emissions and about our plans and want to track that in a lot of detail, and that it feels like the driving force from my perspective. So we built the iceberg, or the sustainability data lake. Just thought I'd say a couple of things about why we decided to do that. The first area was to be able to ask fine-grained questions of the data. So I already just spoke about client questions we get, questions from auditors as well, although that can come with a downside. The more data you give an auditor, the more questions come back. So just be careful about that. Companies often want a carbon footprint for their products and services. In the service business, what that really means is a carbon rate card. So if a client wants to buy a day of my time, how much carbon does that mean? We also need to monitor emissions on a project level, again, driven by customer requirements. And then I'll be talking later about how we select particular projects that will reduce our carbon footprint and things like the carbon tax. Another area at the top right is it allows us for flexibility and methodology. This is quite important given the raft of regulations that are coming and the different types of regulation that might be needed. And so we require some flexibility. At the moment, we use generative AI to look through our invoices to work out emissions in our supply chain. But in the fullness of time, we'll be able to take on more data to drive that as well. And our objective really is to automate as much as possible. So many customers I speak to have a lot of spreadsheets, but that becomes non-feasible eventually. Oh, and also historization. The data nerds on the call will be familiar with this problem. Emission factors change over time, so let's think about that. So for us, a small amount of this is about compliance, which is where we started, and the rest is about action. So here's how the action kind of hits the road, really, and trying to use our data asset to generate our forward view. What you're looking at here is our net zero pathway. So we have a baseline year of 2019-20 and a net zero target year of 2040. The grey line represents a kind of do nothing approach. That already takes account of the things the market will do. So there will be a less carbon intensive electricity grid in the UK, for example, or people will drive more electric vehicles. We know that going into the future. So that's already taken account of. And as a CSO, what you're really trying to battle against is a successful business that might be growing year on year, and at the same time you need to reduce emissions. So the blue lines, the red lines is a bit about our scope 1 and 2, which Levent mentioned briefly. Most of our emissions are scope 3, particularly the supply chain, things like business travel for an organisation like us. And what we're trying to do is create initiatives that actively reduce the emissions in our supply chain. So those blue bars, sorry, across the board, so blue bars go down. And then the green bars are carbon removals. And the green line is one minus the other. Okay, so hopefully enough data people on the call to work out what's going on. But you will see actually that our net zero plan doesn't quite meet zero at the moment because the green line should cross the axis, but it doesn't. So there's more projects we need to do, more abatement projects that are necessary. And also, for those who really get into this, the removals are too high as well. They're about 30%, whereas they should be more like 10%. So there's plenty of work to be done. But what I find as a CSO is if you have the data in front of you, you can see, the size of the problem. Let me tell you a couple more things about how it all works. So as I mentioned, the model includes things like our standard of company growth, where we expect specific growth in emission categories and what's happening in the wider UK market. That gives us our do nothing position. And then all the detail that's inside the platform helps us work out the carbon returns of all our different projects. And that generates our forecast and then eventually a budget request from our Chief Financial Officer. I thought I'd say, given the kind of audience here, I thought I'd say a couple of things about how we're trying to engage the workforce. And I suppose the thing to see is what we say is there's 3 types of projects that we have, and these are examples from our carbon reduction plan. The first is projects they won't see, so our renewable power contracts. Other things are projects that our employees and colleagues will see the effect of, like shutting down parts of our office when it's not being used. They all seem like sensible things. And yet there are projects where we need their help. So one of our targets is to make a 10% year-on-year reduction in the impact of business travel. And all of these things, though, require ongoing monitoring. And of course, for organisational change purpose, we need to provide guidance. We need to lead by example and have things like change champions in our business. Maybe we'll talk about more about that in the Q&A. And of course, the monitoring allows for a level of personal accountability. If people are bought into that, that affects me directly because with my other role, I end up traveling around the world quite a lot. So my own carbon footprint is under scrutiny as well. And I've made a commitment on that as well. So by measuring these things at a detailed level, we can see whether we're being hypocrites or whether we're drinking our own champagne. 2 minutes on the ICT impacts, which is a slightly different tack, but we do a lot of this kind of work, particularly, and it cuts right across your IT strategy, things like the device management and how often you renew those and what kind of devices you buy, And then in software development, which includes data platforms, how we architect those, how we optimize those, and how we optimize on-premise infrastructure as well. So it's quite a wide range of things in this category. And this slide just gives you a sense of where some of those things land in the software development lifecycle as we're building a platform like, a sustainability data lake. So we're members of the Green Software Foundation, so we can use all their input in terms of the design elements and things like code analysis. So we have a code analysis tool that finds code patterns which are high energy, which generate high energy consumption. We have a tool that does ongoing software carbon footprint monitoring using a standard called the Software Carbon Intensity Standard. So that's kind of monitoring in life, and then we can optimize cloud deployments as well, which in itself is not new, but we're starting to measure the carbon impact of that as well. So, quite a lot to fit into a very short space of time, but so these are some of the things that we can do in the IT space as well. I think I've finished my time as well, so I'll stop screen sharing there and hand back to our chair.
It was really interesting. Thank you both. I think we could easily have gone on for another good half an hour, really. So there's lots of info there. So
I'm super impressed you both did it within 10 minutes. That's pretty amazing. I'm glad this is recorded so I can just check that you weren't doing double speed or something.
So I think Lisa was going to open up the floor, to questions.
So I've got a lot of questions, which is going to be no surprise to anybody, but I'm also looking at the chat and seeing the questions come up. But one of my first questions I'm going to pose to really us as a collective is, do we really see the Chief Sustainability Officer as a vertical within the organisation, as we sometimes see Chief Data Officer as an added vertical, or do you think it should be more of a horizontal? I'm going to go with Bill spoke first. Levent held silence.
Well, I think I need to ask what you mean by that, as in the sense that I guess the sense a Chief Sustainability Officer has to have an effect right across the organisation. That's essential. It's impossible to stay in one silo, and that's because every part of our business and our operation is affected, and all of it needs to change. So that's a privilege, because I have a lot of stakeholders amongst our leadership team. I work with people from facilities, I work with people from HR, I work with people in our operations department. Everything needs to change, because what I say is we can't carry on doing business the way we are and achieve our net zero targets. So I don't know whether that is a horizontal or vertical role, what you intended by that, but that would be my answer.
Changing mindsets as well, though, isn't it, really? Because it takes, it does take time. What about you, Levent? What do you think?
I mean, so there's a varied set of organizational lines across many clients that I've seen, and sometimes the Chief Sustainability Officer rolls up into the CFO, sometimes they roll up into the Chief Legal Officer, but regardless of the organizational structure, I think this is one of those areas. So I have a regulatory change background, so the examples that I'm going to give are usually in that space, because I've been in change management my whole life. And I mean, this is kind of like financial crime risk or anti-money laundering. It cuts across all lines of business. Same thing with ESG. It cuts across all lines of business, and it needs. And you've touched on this, Jane. It's kind of about the mind shift. You got to move from IT manages data to it's their data, to everyone saying it's our data. We own this data, and ultimately, to move the needle for sustainability, Bill touched on kind of some of the boots on the ground, like how do you engage the workforce? And I think once people can see that even the smallest things they can do right in their day-to-day jobs by even getting the data quality right, you know, they actually impact to the overall sustainability transformation of their own company. So, yeah.
I think it's quite interesting about how this is going to be me sort of testing a bit with a question, is it's how we need to try and stop doing just data literacy, but about data literacy with a sustainability and climate impact. So one of my questions is really around the how do we bring sustainability and carbon into a business case? What's your thoughts around giving it a cost that people need to factor in when they're looking at projects and investment?
I think Bill's got a really good answer, and then I'll come over the top with some of my other thoughts.
Yeah, happy to. So sometimes a sustainability investment case actually is cost saving to the organisation anyway. So some of our measures, I don't know, when we reduce business travel, that has a bottom line saving in and of itself. So that's, I guess, a simple part. Secondly, you can turn carbon savings into cash using an internal carbon cost, which is about £35 a tonne for our company. So that's also quite straightforward. And then, but for the kind of more strategic things and perhaps the more difficult areas of change, I often say this is about access to markets. So we could choose not to go ahead with this business case, but then we could choose to lose access to these customers. Is that what we want to do? I don't think so. So it's a combination of different things, really. But if you can show how customers are interested, then that gets people's minds focused.
And I'm going to add to that great answer from Bill. So I think because we're talking about people here, I think people want to see genuine leadership, that this is not just greenwashing or, you know, companies just kind of putting some nice images on their annual statements and their sustainability report. This is more about, you know, people on the ground, the workforce wanting to see what we call that golden thread of responsibility under Prince 2. You know, how does what I do on the bottom link all the way to the top? And you know, coming to the top of the house, what I've seen across many of the clients that we help is the companies that have set executive remuneration that's actually linked to sustainability. You know, they're the ones that are taking this seriously, because in a way, I mean, we're all motivated by money, right? We're not working for free. And if it's in my HR scorecard as an executive to get this right, then I'm going to make sure that I'm going to do whatever I can to motivate the workforce to do the right thing. Now, if we take that up another level, you know, the timelines we are talking about here, it's so obvious, but I think we forget. You know, we're talking about timelines of 2050, 2060, 2070. And, you know, when I've witnessed or read, you know, case studies of big kind of tier one consultancies setting the sustainability targets at a group level, what they do is they make the board members close their eyes and think about their grandchildren and think about what kind of a world they want to leave behind and for them, and what will the company that they are representing, what role will they play in that future? And, you know, kind of getting that emotional link to the business strategy to do the right thing at the board level, and then translating that to executive remuneration, and then doing your materiality assessment to understand, you know, let's say even double materiality, what impacts of ESG are on our company and what are our company's impacts on the environment and the people, and all of that then starts to translate into actions that you can follow through with, and then hopefully have the support of the workforce because it's all genuine.
Levent, you talked about timelines as being out as 2050, 2060, but for me, I think our timelines, Bill talked about having a 2040 challenge, but still I think it was your green line that you were saying was not quite hitting that.
Yeah, that's right.
But actually there's a lot of evidence and talk around we need a 2030 strategy, and that being our objective. How do you feel about having that agility within our strategies to have to adjust to non-action and then cause our timelines to get closer?
Well, if I were to answer that, I would say, I guess that's why you need flexibility in your data to be able to model those different scenarios. So, for example, that plan will change year by year because we have other assumptions. We have new data about, like, the decarbonisation efforts of our suppliers and so on. I think I'm going to hand over to Levent for his view and then come back.
Sure. So look, what's happened, I mean, this is such a multifaceted problem, is what's happened is a lot of the multinational companies that are the heaviest emitters have gone ahead and set quite ambitious targets for 2030, and they're struggling right now. And I don't know if you guys have seen in the news recently, but you know, the Science Based Targets Initiative is now allowing for more carbon credits and to be used, and the you know, there's now different ways of getting verified carbon credits. One example is the London Stock Exchange and the voluntary carbon market, where they are allowing companies that have come up with amazing technologies for carbon removal, because, you know, to get this right, it's not just about reduction of you know, carbon. We also need to find ways to be able to finance technologies that are reducing or capturing carbon. And they've created this really neat ecosystem where they can then make the carbon credits available to companies so that they can offset against that. Now, I'm not advocating that the companies you know, should take no action and just get by with carbon credits. I'm not advocating that at all. But you know, I think there are some of those hard to abate industries where you're going to have to leverage carbon credits, or you're relying on your supply chain. That's a long discussion to talk with each of your suppliers to say, look, how can we decarbonize? You know, maybe in your lorries, can we look at using biodiesel instead of diesel? And it's a very long conversation. And until you know, everyone switches on and all the companies, even the small to medium enterprise companies, play catch up, it's going to take time. And you know, I think there's a lot of ways for companies, especially with voluntary carbon markets, to still do the right thing.
I mean, if you don't mind me, I completely agree. And Bill, I'm hoping this is a connective, is that to me, this is why having a really robust data strategy and data management approach is absolutely key, because we need to keep modelling all the solutions and scenarios to then be able to keep making effective decisions. And the decisions are no longer static. Oh, I've made that, and that's what we're going to stay at for 4 years. I think, Bill, you said you're reviewing it every year, but I would imagine that frequency might have to adjust as we get closer to a deadline and how we then need to respond. Bill, did you want to add anything to the timeline and strategy point?
Yeah, probably just one thing. I mean, we have a 2030 goal as well, which we're on track to meet. I mean, fortunately, the pandemic's kind of helped with that, ironically. But we're under pressure to have more interim targets, and I think that's right, because otherwise that drives kind of mindsets here and now, rather than, you know, if you've got a very short-term thinking in your organisation, you might think, oh, you know, 2040, that's a long way away. But when I look at the numbers, it seems frighteningly close, given the scale of change that we need to achieve. And so I think the key thing is agility, which is kind of one of the reasons why we built our own asset.
So we've got a couple of questions from people joining in. So Krista, she was very quick with a hand up, a virtual hand up, should I say. And Simone will come to you next.
I will read from a question in chat that, apologies if I pronounce it wrong, Ichi's put it in there. So Bill did well to enumerate stakeholders for his organisation. Is it possible to place a higher emphasis on the public people as stakeholders? Have you seen this message in chat, Bill? So it continues.
No, I haven't, but that's quite easy to answer for us, I think, because NTT Data is a B2B business, so our customers are other businesses rather than consumers, and so, you know, part of the reason I'm here is because of our public image, and that's obviously important to us, but probably the decisions of individual consumers affect us less than other types of companies, but that's why I mentioned customers as a really important driver, right? Because of course, in a B2B business, the customers are well informed and they know exactly what they're looking for and you know, want to put you on the hook for your commitments and so on. The general public, much less informed, lots of other things to think about. So the messages need to be much simpler, right? And so brands that face out to the general public have it more of a kind of brand asset or brand identity. They want to be sustainable rather than because every customer is banging on their door saying, well, you know, tell me this data or how you're going to meet net zero at this point. The consumers aren't really doing that. But one of the areas we are looking at, which might interest you, is helping the computer games industry, because obviously we're in a kind of software space ourselves. So how can we put ratings on a computer game, basically like a traffic light system, say what kind of environmental impact does this game have? And that's the level you think about consumers. You know, maybe even someone won't take account of that information when they're choosing a game. But if they do, you've got to kind of boil it down to that. So it's very different working in a business of facing out to the general public versus in a B2B.
Yeah, they went on to make the point that it's especially due to the responsibility of the professional community to deepen the critical nature of ESG adoption. With the more people who can see the impact of sustainability, the greater will adopt across the human endeavour. And just to add my own kind of flip on that as well, is it's very much the same problem that data is having about having that cultural change as well. So it kind of really can leverage each other in order to communicate that and create that, using your words as well, Bill, kind of removal of business as usual and really transforming how we work.
I mean, there's the interesting addition of scope 4 that's in the pipeline around, so we've got, as Levent demonstrated, the scope 1, 2 and 3, but scope 4 is really, I think, targeting the more B2C businesses, because they have to start to understand how they can abate emissions at the consumer level. So the example I use is that we probably see it quite a lot around laundry detergent, that you can wash it at 30 degrees or you can wash it at 20 degrees. Companies will then start to be needing to report on how they're doing that to help customers reduce their carbon footprint. So that's in the pipeline.
I think
I just want to also add some perspective as well. So this is where the supply chain regulations are also really helping, in my opinion. So in the US, we had Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which was passed in December of 2022. The European Parliament just approved the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which looks at making sure that companies do due diligence all the way through to sourcing of raw materials, making sure that none of the suppliers are using child labor, forced labor, that they're not dumping any toxic waste into the rivers of the indigenous people, because historically they used to get away with saying, hey, it's not our problem. The country doesn't have those regulations. And now the regulation makes it the responsibility of the company to make sure that in their entire supply chain, you know, they don't have any forced labor or companies that are doing the wrong thing. So certainly from my perspective, you know, we've been focused on the E of ESG, carbon, but there's human rights, the S of ESG and the supply chains. I mean, that you know, is really close to my heart as well. and it's a part of, you know, seeing the greater impact of sustainability.
And I think this is how that's kind of the route to go down in terms of trying to get the importance of this across to Joe Public, because, you know, it's just banging that drum in terms of, you know, how you know, I suppose businesses deal with, you know, the whole human trafficking piece. You know, it's just it's obviously hugely important, and I think, you know, just putting it into layman's terms, you know, I think that's how we try and get that message across, you know, to a lot more people out there. So
I think it's interesting, the push for businesses to do better is then going to be that consumers, as an independent going into a supermarket, that it's not necessarily about them having to make a choice or pay a premium for a lower carbon or more environmentally friendly product, is that it's just there by default.
yes,
Simone has been incredibly patient.
she has.
So, Simone, over to you, ask your question, and then we'll go to Punet.
I hope I haven't forgotten, because it was such a long time ago.
You have been
very patient, Simone.
I'm connecting a few things. Obviously, thank you all for sharing your thoughts and experience there. People who don't know me, Simone Steele, and I'm a former Chief Data and Analytics Officer for financial institution. And in that role and several other roles, talking to the exec board and the non-exec board about the uncertainties that we have around the data and the models and the results of the model is not an easy task. Where I'm going with this is that the financial incentives that Levent mentioned before, even appealing to their emotional selves, I think they're more interested in the trust fund they're leaving for their grandchildren than the planet. So the short-term incentives are still far, far stronger than doing the right thing. However, I think their heart's in the right place, and I always believe people have good intent. Showing that you are in a good position on the E, the S, or the G, showing that you're in a good position is okay. If we use, to Bill's example, AI to look deeply into your supply chain, and we miraculously find with public information that everybody has a plan for net zero. I haven't yet seen anyone in my supply chain that says we're really not going to make it. Right? They will get out of the woods by buying carbon credits, however dodgy they might be, to show that at least they have a plan. So how do we communicate? I think that's the crux of my question. How do we communicate to those senior executives and non-executives that the level of uncertainty of our scope 3 is huge, and therefore we shouldn't really pat ourselves in the back without, you know, really wanting to personally get involved into not just delegating it to the data companies to go and give us the rating for company X, because I can see a Lehman Brothers credit rating thing all over this again, right? But now with environmental ratings, ESG ratings rather than credit ratings. So how is your experience discussing that level of uncertainty around these numbers with your board?
I don't mind starting. So I suppose in reality, we're at a slightly earlier stage, which is agreeing a carbon reduction plan in the first place and a set of measures we're going to start. I guess my mantra is, let's start now because of that uncertainty. We don't know if we're going to have to ramp this up even more. And I think the level of uncertainty is huge. And the other thing I say to our leadership team, which I've also said to you on the call today, is we don't yet have a plan that completely meets net zero, and there's too much carbon offsetting going on it, right? So we already know where we've got to now is not good enough, right? So I think it's better to be honest about that, and that's what the data tells me. And sometimes I look around and think, are other people just kind of taking their current net zero number and drawing a straight line to their net zero date and keeping their fingers crossed? Because it's been quite a lot of work to get to this stage. So that's the message I give, which is like, we're not even there yet, and so I don't think we have that level of kind of hubris, but be interested in Levent's view as well.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I completely agree. It's about, sobering honesty first and foremost. And, a lot of the clients we talk about, we help. I mean, it's really critical to have good metadata management. If you're using proxy data because you simply don't have the data, if you're using proxy data, you need to be able to capture that really well so that you can go back a few years in time and see, okay, what data fed the calculations back then, and so that you can keep evolving and reviewing that every year, looking at your planning assumptions and saying, okay, what new data do we have available today that we can actually start to get more accurate. And it's about not letting perfection be the enemy of good, because we all need to start, but it's about also making sure that you document the metadata really well so that you've always got a way to evidence what decisions you took when, based on what data you had at that point in time.
I think my addition to you, Simone, is I actually share your fear around this, giving a credit rating or an ESG rating onto businesses. And I mean, I'm sure Levent and Bill will add to this, is that if you look at some of the ESG ratings at the moment, it's actually some of the larger fossil fuel companies that have been rated the best because of the way that the reporting is happening and how their considerations are being taken into place. But within, I think when Levent and Bill have spoken about this, non-financial data needs to now be treated as important as your financial data. We are in an early phase of regulation and legislation, and we're not going to be like the finance sector that only had standards set in 73. This is going to go at such a pace of being learning and being confirmed and being updated. So from my view, the ratings are a risk, but they're also a risk for debate of actually how good is the information that has been based on. And I think, Bill, you alluded to the double materiality part. That's coming in now as part of the regulation. If you can't just say this is how climate is impacting me, you have to report on what you're doing to impact the climate. But I think the whole carbon offsetting is a bit of a murky area. But we're data people. We've lived with lake houses and warehouses and all of the murk around those some of the time. So it will become clear. I'm then going to bring Punit in to ask his question, and then Peter, who I know can voice an opinion about sustainability in data, because we've already had a chat. But Punit, please go first. Ask your question.
Hi there. So very quickly, on an operational level, how do you prevent greenwashing and data being misinterpreted? And is that the responsibility of the CSO?
Who's
Bill?
going to go first?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, why don't you go
I'll
first this time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, one of the roles that I missed out on that in this context of the question is also the chief marketing officer, because whatever claims you're making has to really be evidenced with data, and you really need cross-functional verification also from your legal team as well to make sure that that can withstand legal scrutiny. Otherwise, if you're making green claims and you can't evidence it with data, then you're going to be in big shit, basically. Over to you, Bill.
Okay,
Thank you for being brief, because we are rolling into our last 5 minutes.
We are indeed.
Blown
I
by,
mean, in answer to the question, whose problem it is, if they are greenwashing, I think the buck has to stop with the chief sustainability officer. Otherwise, what's the point of the role, right? So that person needs to work with the marketing team, who might be trying to make more of something than it should. Otherwise, that person doesn't have integrity. So greenwashing is definitely a danger. But how do you avoid misinterpretations of data and kind of perhaps putting a spin on it deliberately to create a good outcome? I think it's about radical transparency at the end of the day. So what we tend to do, and what you've seen so far, is actually reveal quite a lot of data about what we do, and then you know, people can hold us to account based on what we've shown, rather than put a spin message on it. And I am, yeah, it's a tightrope you have to walk, because clearly you want to present your company in the best possible light, and we do work in sustainability ourselves. But at the same time, I think it's not about being arrogant and assuming everyone has the answer, which is why it's been such a great experience being on this webinar with some real experts. So you know, always learning.
Peter, I'm going to give you a 1 minute question.
I was going to start with a couple of statements actually, and then the question, because it's the same question I asked before, but I'm interested. I think we have to remember that this is a topic that within complex businesses nowadays, just one topic. And I think there's a danger in these forums, it becomes very myopic on that topic. But, you know, there are lots of new CXO roles within businesses that have a horizontal slice rather than top down slice. And I think all are competing for funding, for attention, for everything, right? And this is just one. And I think the best way to do that within a business is to show incremental benefit, right? You've got to show that you are making good progress on something that matters to the business, right? Whether that's keeping customers, whether that's making more profit, reducing costs, doesn't matter. It's like anything, you have to show a benefit at the end of the day, right? So you really have to focus there, in my view. I think the topic of non-zero is dangerous. I personally hate it because I think it gives an opt-out clause for anybody who's trying to drive an agenda but doesn't actually have the real benefit at heart. So I think the sooner we can get rid of that out of the topic, the better, quite frankly. We need to hold people's sort of noses to the stone and just grind them hard. In terms of the question, as I say, apologies, it's the same question as before. I've yet to see any real evidence that consumers will go from one product to another because the ESG credentials aren't matching to their expectations. I don't doubt the groundswell. I agree that business to business are doing very well in terms of driving the agenda, but consumers, Bill, is there any evidence from your side that consumers are switching, that it is a tangible thing of interest to consumers?
I personally am not seeing a huge amount of evidence, actually. Brands are conscious of it. But here's a good example, right? We say, okay, well, oftentimes young people are really bothered about these things. And in the context of the computer gaming industry, if we put a rating on a game, would anybody actually change? And that's definitely an open question. But if you look at some of their behaviours as well, young people are really into fast fashion, for example, which is not very sustainable at all. So there's this sort of fundamental disconnect. I feel like Lisa might have an insight though, because you brought this topic up, right?
Yeah. I don't know whether the 1 minute left is going to give me an out. Kantar have done a lot of research about how people are moving from looking at more sustainable brands, but there is a conflict at the moment with the cost of living crisis because there's so many things that are seen as green premium. So there's a lot of work from within organisations, as I said earlier, that we just need to become more sustainable by design, remove the sense of a green premium, and that then it's not about making consumer choices, but it's just about making things better. I can see another Peter in the group with his hand up, but we have hit 1 o'clock. So Peter, please do. I'm
sure, Peter, we can.
Oh, go on.
Yeah,
as long as everybody's okay.
He's been so patient as well.
Very strict, Lisa, isn't she?
I'm very happy to share.
I do apologise.
I was a CSO back in 2009, and the data thing fascinates me because my role has changed, I don't know, about 5 different phases over those years. It's completely different to when I first started up as a CSO. I come from an FMCG B2B and B2C brand. There is a desire by a very affluent part of the demographic to have more sustainable products, but everyone must not think of sustainable as pure carbon, because sustainability to different consumers means a hell of a lot of things. It's a massive sort of breadth of meanings, from welfare to where it's come from to provenance. Is it local? There's this, that. Even taste comes into consumers' minds, and there is research that does show that they do care, but price always talks, and so does quality. Those 2 are the key factors that drive repeat custom. And good brands don't actually ask consumers if they care or not. Good brands design it inside their product from word go, and they offer consumers sustainable consumer consumer options. And that's what I did years ago with Bird's Eye, did it at Tesco when we started it back in 2008. And far too early, they were carbon footprinting when no one even had a clue about what the hell it meant. And we wasted sort of millions on the damn thing. And all these years later, and consumers still don't get it. So it's a raft of things. I was thanking for the invitation. The thing around why I came on this call is actually because in the CSO space, data is actually a really, really critical part of the CSO role now. Don't worry about greenwashing. Yes, I've been signing off products for years, but that's because I'm also in regulatory affairs and technical. So I created this stage gate process where I wouldn't let marketeers bullshit, because marketers generally push the envelope of honesty, right?
Shut your ears,
their job,
right?
And I've been arguing with marketers ever since, and it's just the role that one has to have in the company. So if you have some authentication system you present, that's why I've never ever worried about greenwashing in any country. So it's just a really rich discussion. Thanks ever so much for the invitation. There's just so much, but it just shows how important data has now become. And yes, it is horizontal. Absolutely, the CSO is horizontal, but it's more than that now. It really is. Data has to be owned by everybody. It really is a critical currency of any company now.
And everyone's
even
got
if
a
we
part
didn't
to
have
play,
net zero,
don't they, really?
you can't in the tech world not have data proficiency, so.
Well, I think, Peter, you've sort of drawn this session to a beautiful close, that sustainability and data is everybody's responsibility, and we need to be doing better with both.
Absolutely true. That's my view anyway.
And I totally agree with you, Peter. I think we should just promote you as the first Chief Sustainability Officer ever.
Yeah, I've got that accolade. I just don't talk about it, but it is true. Yeah, I was in 2009 at Bird's Eye. I was the first CSO.
Wow.
Wow.
Oh, I definitely need to chat to you, Peter. Yeah. For the sustainability, with Eden Smith and Concept Zero, we've started to create the sustainability in data community. Yes, it is called SID with no gender. If you go to LinkedIn, do a search for Get SID, you'll be able to request to join. It is emerging, as we've sort of proved here. The connection between the two is very close. But Levent, thank you so much for coming along. And I did not believe you'd do those 10 slides in the slides in 10 minutes. Bill, thank you. It was excellent seeing what you're doing with NTT and how we have a situation and how we've all been talking about data for a long time, but how important it is for us to get into a better future. So thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the session, but that's probably not a surprise.
No, it's really good session. And thanks
everyone.
Yeah, so thanks so much everyone for attending.
Enjoy
and
the sunshine.
Bill, event as well. Enjoy the sunshine, as you say, and
all the best.
Yeah. So
all the best. Thanks everyone.
Good afternoon all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.